So I want to open with a question, and that is, who is the queen of cyber? To give you some hints, here are a couple of our favorite wrong answers from the beginning of the year. These were submitted by undergraduates from our security club. Does anyone have any ideas? Feel free to shout them out.
I forgot.
So, hi, my name is Klatzco. I'm an undergrad in computer engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So I'm really all about being nice to people and building organizations. So I have spent most of the last year working on building up 2 clubs at the university. One of those is the DDR Club, and the other one is the Undergraduate Security Club, whose name is SIGPON. Here's a laundry list of a couple of other things that I'm interested in. In particular, I want to point out that last summer I worked on a fuzzer. It's an open source and cross-platform. It's called Killer Bees. And at the end of this year, I'm going to be going to Japan for about 3 months. So if you've got suggestions for places to go in Japan or cool people to meet, I'd love to have them. So I'm here on behalf of and with a large contingent from SIGPON, which is U of I's Undergraduate Security Club. The SIG stands for Special Interest Group, and the PON is a pun on pony and also ponying, hence the whole unicorn. This logo was actually made on really short notice by one of our members, whose name is Daniel. So we're from U of I, which is approximately 3.5 hours south of Milwaukee. And we drove up here last night with a group of about 10 people. And I think from our university, there's about 20 people total, including alums. So we're advised by 3 professors. These are the people that we go to whenever we get into trouble and we need help getting out of some issue, whether that be with university IT. It doesn't happen too often, but there were a few incidents this year. And people who we go to for general advice for how to run the club. So if we have some issue with, we don't know how to handle this situation with bureaucracy or with finances, then we can go to them. So it's pretty well known that getting novices into security is really hard. And this is kind of a subset of a larger problem, which is that getting people into technical things or learning about technical things is a really challenging thing to do. So why is that the case? Well, security itself is a really difficult field. It's fast moving, you constantly have to keep up to date on new research. You have to study a lot for a long period of time by candlelight, basically, like your computer monitor today, I guess. Alone with a computer in order to pick up all these sort of esoteric skills for a really wide set. Beyond that, there's lots of other interesting things in life too, and that's especially true on a university campus when there's lots of different clubs. Beyond that, there's not a huge amount of learning resources. If you want to pick up something, you need to go and find these resources yourself, which can be a challenge in and of itself. And then they're really difficult to make as well. It takes a lot of effort. So we've got kind of our problem statement, which is that teaching people security is a really challenging thing to do. So why do we care about this thing? Well, it's also really important. There's a lot of jobs in security, and the concepts are really broadly applicable. So if you're an individual who may not necessarily care very much, the concept of a threat model or allocating labor appropriately based on how much you're concerned about something is really broadly applicable. And then password managers or 2FA is another thing that works really well for a broad number of people. Beyond that, a lot of people are really drawn to security because it's a cool field. And if you can kind of capitalize on that or exploit it, so to speak, then you can help a lot of people learn more about it. So that gives us our motivation for why we care about this problem. So the responsive industry in the security community is time to make CTF. And this is a rather old thing. It basically said, okay, let's take a bunch of challenges that teach some small nugget of security information and then let's gamify them. So let's give people different levels and let's give them a strong incentive to do them. And this works pretty well. You typically log into a website that looks like this one. It has a collection of challenges. You select a challenge, which is kind of like this short textual description of what's going on. And the thing is that it's a little bit opaque. It'll have something like a netcat, like NC, a username, and an IP, which to an untrained eye looks like a bunch of text with some numbers and @ sign. And without any context, this doesn't make any sense. So if you manage to get far enough, then you'll realize that, oh, there are these challenges, which is kind of this like amorphous concept that's not super well defined, and that you're looking for flags. And if you get flags, then there'll be points. I want to point out that in SIGPONY, we don't refer to them as points, we refer to them as pony points, and they need to be delivered with exactly that inflection too. So We've tried gamifying this problem of learning hard things, but it's still really challenging. It's a really lonely exercise, in that a lot of CTF challenges you'll solve solo, and then you won't actually take too much away other than what you can do yourself. And this can be really demotivating for people. So let's go back to SigPony. So SigPony is a club. It's a group of young people. If you look at schools like RPI or CMU, SigPony doesn't really hold a candle to their really cool accomplishments. They regularly send a lot of people to DEF CON CTF every year. They'll place at the top of CTF leaderboards. They have really cool research output. They spin off companies that do cool things like win DARPA's CypherCon challenge. Strictly speaking, the company came after the challenge, but they'll publish entire classes that are dedicated to binary exploitation, and they just throw them up on GitHub for anyone to do. This is all really cool stuff, and SigPony had some individual projects that were impressive, but nothing that really was a team effort. So I was talking with Paul, who is another senior from our school, and he and I went out after our last meeting, where we traditionally watch hackers together. Now, 4 people came to that meeting total, and Paul and I were out getting food, and we were talking to each other about, hey, why aren't there more people here? Why aren't more people drawn to come and work together and play together? You know, it seems like SigPony's not that good, and I want it to be good. So that naturally leads to the question of how can we make it better? So that then becomes our big question for the year. Okay, so we concluded that the core unit of SigPony was the weekly meeting, and that if the meetings weren't good, then the club wasn't good. And the meetings weren't good. They were not fun. They were really long, like maybe 90 minutes. One person would talk alone without any actual interaction with people, and then you'd be kind of thrown off the deep end to go and try and solve challenges. And this is a way for some people to learn security. In particular, if you have existing context, it's relatively easy. But outside of that, newcomers have a really hard time with this. And so if we want to make SigPony meetings better, we need to make it easier to learn. And the flip side of this is that we need to get better at teaching. Okay, so then that's our answer. We know that teaching security is hard. We have this basic unit of a meeting. We need to focus on teaching better meetings. So that's an easier deal, right? Teaching is education is viewed as this thing that's not super challenging or technically difficult, right? That's why, if I want to teach a bunch of freshmen how to install Linux for the first time, I give them a couple of shell commands and they're off finding 0 days in software and winning CTF 500s, right? Yeah, it turns out that it's not that easy, and this is kind of really, given my 15 years of education that I'm about to finish, really gives me a newfound appreciation for my teachers. That it's not quite a simple problem. So you might ask why I waited until I was about to finish college in order to try any of this. Well, when I came into college, I didn't know anything about security. And so I needed to build from the ground up a lot of the basic concepts. And then once I had picked up a certain amount of breadth, this enabled me to go forth and teach things to younger people. The other thing is that SigPony didn't have a good way for young people to contribute. And this was kind of a shame because I had this energy that I wanted to learn, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I didn't have a place where I could sort of push this that was well-defined and actually create some value for the club. So we created a list of things that we wanted meetings to be, which I think the important one here is dropping in. We didn't want to shame people for not being able to make it. And so we made each one a standalone, completely self-contained thing that only required concepts from that one meeting. And this allowed newcomers to still be able to learn a lot, regardless of whether they'd be able to make all of the meetings throughout the entire year. Beyond that, you should learn in a SigPony meeting. So we came up with these pony questions, and these are sort of the big 3 things we thought would lead us to being better at teaching. In particular, that's how do we make them come back? How do we make it less work to generate all of this? And then how do we actually measure our success? So the basic structure of a week for us is that at the beginning of the week, I will message some unlucky underclassman, and say, hey, you're responsible for teaching the meeting this week. Or it's often a, would you be willing to, that kind of means that please do this. And then on Tuesday or Wednesday, we'll meet in person or remotely collaborate via some online tool. and we'll flesh out the basic flow of the challenges. So we'll make a bunch of really easy ones that are targeted at people who are like, hey, I don't know what base64 is, or I don't know what x86's move instruction does. And so these very simple challenges will just try to teach them extreme primitives. And then from there, we have a medium and a hard challenge, which kind of wind up to being like CTF 100, 200 pointers, which is to say something you can reasonably solve in like 30 minutes if you have experience, and a lot more time if you don't. And so we'll present all of these things, and the person responsible for preparing the meeting also gives a short presentation, and then people will go and they'll actually solve them. So then hopefully this means that on Thursday we'll teach the meeting and people will do the challenges, and if they have any spare time, then they'll go and do it on the weekend as well. This is the ideal view of things. What actually typically ends up happening is that right before 7 on Thursday, we'll quickly crank out a new meeting. And it ends up working pretty well. People take a lot away and they learn from it, learn from our meetings, which is something that we hope to see. But we also have ways to measure that. So let's walk through the actual structure of what we do every week. We came up with a couple of things that worked really well for us that we think are broadly applicable and might be usable in other organizations. The first one is the attendance flag, which helps us solve the problem of let's get people coming back to the club. And what this is at the very beginning of a meeting, I'll walk up to the board and I'll write a flag for coming that's worth a reasonable number of points, like typically about half the sum total of what you'd make if you solved everything. And yet, I actually implemented this out of kind of a petty reason. The person at the top of the leaderboard was never coming to meetings, but still held the top spot on the leaderboard. And this made me really unhappy because I wanted the club to be like a team, right? And if you never come in person, you can't be a team. So I started making these relatively higher point value attendance flags so that not only would people be incentivized to come, but people fall off of the top of the leaderboard. So at the very beginning of a meeting, we'll actually go and show people why they're here. So what this means is that we'll go to our SigPony CTF website and we'll log in. I don't know where my monitor is. And this ends up being particularly useful for newcomers because they see exactly what the point is of coming right away. And we'll show them, oh, hey, you can go and you can click on a challenge, and the reason why we're here is to do challenges, and then submit a flag. And so this simple act of showing them exactly what they need to do before the beginning of every meeting works really well because they instantly get why they're there. And so this does a lot for us in terms of being able to actually, sorry, I lost my notes. This is really useful for us in terms of helping newcomers understand the reasoning for actual. So this had an unintended side effect, and that was that we could look at the list of solves for a given week, and we'd get an attendance list for everyone who came. And this is kind of cool because then it gives us data, so we can measure when do people come the most, when are people least available. And you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of lows whenever we have a midterm week, and that there's a whole bunch of highs predictably at the first meeting when all the freshmen come for the first time, and whenever we have an external speaker come in. In particular, we had two. This first one was Thomas Ptacek, who's a really cool Chicago area security professional. He founded Mopsano, which was later bought by NCC Group. And so he has kind of a similar idea of like learning by doing, and was really happy to come and teach a meeting for us that was following our format. So he focused on attacks on AES and deserialization attacks on web applications. And then we also ran an event with Northrop Grumman, which was kind of a great excuse to make a flyer with Comic Sans and call it a hackathon, but you actually do hacking, which is a tagline that I really like and I hope to use in the future. So this is nice because we got to meet together in a room and like they bought us pizza and just solved a couple of basic reversing challenges. And we focused on making sure that everyone in the room got through all of the reversing challenges. So let's move on to the next meeting feature, which is that we came up with a strict format. We'd have 15 minutes to speak and 45 minutes to help people solve challenges. And this is to fight the boredom that SigPony kind of created initially. it's a necessary component of security to learn by doing. You can't just read about things in books, you have to actually apply your skills. And we then made our meetings reflect this. So this also kind of solves our issue of we need to get people coming back, because then they're able to, they have a consistent, like they actually are doing things and learning things, they're more likely to come back. And the thing that we noticed here is that just by walking around and being friendly, you're a lot more likely to have people coming back. And that's kind of a powerful thing. I really like Julia Evans, who is this cool person who works for Stripe. And she has kind of this general aesthetic of, hey, let's learn things together as opposed to focusing on who's the right or who's the best. And this goes a really long way for helping newcomers actually stay. And when you retain newcomers, then your club can grow. So I want to revisit this question of who is the queen of cyber, right? But now I want to do it a little bit more in the format of a CypherCon meeting. So here's the challenge description. It just has a link to this Twitter account, and I want to encourage all of you to go ahead and open up this Twitter account and try to find the answer to this question. I'll give you a small hint. We run a CTF every year. It's a pun on the name of our university. If you're to search for this, you might find some interesting things on this Twitter account. So we're going to take a small break and go ahead and do that. Our CypherCon members are actually going to walk around and help people do this in the format of our meeting typically. So feel free to make some new friends. Twitter has a nice search syntax. It's quite Gmail-like. So if you go searching for from this particular Twitter account with the name of our CTF, you'll find this tweet, which is a flag that we use for one of our public CTF competitions. Okay, so what do we learn from this particular kind of a meeting format? Well, it's that if we kind of really aggressively push people towards the answer, if we help by giving them all the parts and giving them a lot of support, then they're a lot more likely to learn things, especially if they're new. And because this field is so intimidating, it's really useful to help new people learn things and keep coming back. So let's move on to the next one. We started a full-time internal CTF with a live feedback component that I think is really cool. So this was a little bit of an accident. We spun up a typical instance of CTFD for our very first meeting, and then we left it up. So this wasn't super intended. I kept paying the server bills, but it was the case that we needed a meeting for the following week. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll just upload some more challenges to the CTFD. And then we just kept using it because people kept solving things. So on top of that, we added a very social component to it. Discord is Slack, but basically markets itself as for gamers. It's really useful for a lot of things. Namely, it has a webhook functionality, just like Slack does. And so we forked CTFD and we added webhooks to it, such that every single time that somebody solves a challenge, that'll get posted directly in one of the channels. And so this is really cool because if you are working late and trying to solve a really hard challenge, and then you finally get it at 3 a.m., it's no longer this lonely ordeal of, oh, I got the flag and I moved up a spot on the leaderboard. It's a little bit cooler than that because now your friends can be like, oh, nice job. I wrote that challenge, you just solved it, what'd you learn? Or even cooler, how'd you solve it? Or they could be like, oh, you stole my spot on the leaderboard. I'm gonna take that back tomorrow. And so this happens a lot, but the cool thing is that it's a lot more of a friendly sort of leaderboard hopping. This was implemented by one of our students whose name is James. And this is probably the single best thing that we've done in terms of making the experience of CypherCon more social and more friendly and more enjoyable for people. This really does a lot. Okay, so let's go to the last thing of our particular meeting. We decided to document a lot of things. So CypherCon's seniors graduate and academic clubs have a lot of churn, so we wanted to have some way of a cohesive club identity. And this goes back to our pony question of how do we create less work for us in the future. So we're investing all of this effort. If we make some documentation for how to do things, then it'll expedite the process in the future. So for example, we have some pages up on our wiki that demonstrate, okay, this is the formula you follow for making a meeting. And if you follow all these steps, then you'll be able to pretty quickly make something that can be reused in the future. And so that's where canning meetings comes in, canning your boxing, your packaging. We'll we had this issue where we would constantly recreate meetings every single year. And this was a lot of wasted effort. But then we thought, hey, what are the actual core things that you need to reproduce a meeting? And we settled on sort of these three. And so that if we can just make that in a nice small format, then we can really easily reuse this in the future. So there's another useful aspect here. I have this thing I like to call Minion Recruitment, which is where students can get actual university credit for doing research projects with professors. This is the benefit of being on really good terms and having a good working relationship with professors, is that we can sign up all the freshmen so that they get a grade for CypherCon work. And this is really useful because now they have a bigger stake into actually doing things and coming back. I get to do things like, hey, can you do this unit of work? And then if they don't do the unit of work, they don't get a good grade. So they've got a strong incentive to keep doing CypherCon things. This also kind of solves our earlier problem of CypherCon didn't really have like a defined structure for young ones to contribute. But now with this, there's a very clear path of, oh, I want to do something cool. I want to learn about this topic. How can I do it in a way that's more fun and more social? So we created like basically Readme's, same deal, documentation to box up these meetings and a text format that's based on YAML and just feeds right into our blog format. So all a student has to do is update this text file with some information according to this small how-to-do list, and then it'll render really nicely on the website. And just give them, okay, as the person who's running the meeting, this is what you need, and then there's the email verb, and you can just send this out. And we put these all up on our website. So if you're interested in, if you are affiliated with running any sort of security education that teaches, and you need a presentation on short notice, you can totally, please feel free to grab them from our site. They're designed to be reused, and we'd be really happy to see other people getting value from our work. I also want to shout out a program called Hacks, which is run by the company I worked for last summer, RIM. This is sort of the same idea, where universities will team up into this program, and someone will be responsible for making a challenge every month or so, and then we'll share it amongst all the universities. And so this reduces a lot of the workload of actually designing challenges, because that's really hard. So I've got a small disclaimer. We do reuse a lot of existing things, like CTFs that already are up and running. This helps cut back on the work a lot. We try to attribute this as much as possible, and then the actual value that we create is in the presentations that we give, and then walking around and helping people solve things. Okay, so we went over these cool things that we did to make our meetings better, and we went over all of these ways to keep people coming back and learning more things and doing less work. So how do we actually measure our success here? So here's this current status of the leaderboard as of last week. These are the top 10 players. You'll notice that some people came way in mid-January or even mid-March and still managed to climb into the top 10 relatively quickly. I want to also congratulate the 3 people who came to the most meetings, because I think this is an important metric as well. This is one of those useful side effects of collecting the attendance lens. Thomas and Jesse are both here today, so they're really friendly, and well, one of them is really friendly. And so please talk to them and get to know them, because they're really cool people. So here's a zoomed in view of 1 week of our CTF. You'll notice that here's Thursday at 7 p.m., which is our traditional meeting time. But this is Friday night. And this is Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. Well, that's halfway between Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. So this made me really happy, because this was an example of, oh, people are actually working on things on their own time. And that was kind of the whole point of putting all of this effort into making better meetings, so that people would get into this and that they would want to learn more. The other cool thing is that you'll notice that people will stay after the 1 hour of the meeting, which meant that they actually wanted to solve the problems. And that was another thing that made me really happy. A side effect of collecting attendance data is that we get an average number of people over the course of the year. So back the year prior, it would get to be the last meeting of the semester, it would be me and 3 other people. Just, people who were really, really dedicated and didn't get scared away. But here, we've now hit an average of 18 people, such that our last meeting still draws like 15 or 20 people a semester, even when there's finals coming up. And so I think that that's another example of, hey, we did a pretty good job of making this club way more open to newcomers and helping more talented people get in that door. However, we also had a couple of, as I like to say, oopsie-whoopsies. There was an instance. Can anyone tell me what this is? You'll notice in particular that I think this is cool, is that it says Rudy, and if you look on a QWERTY keyboard, the T and the Y are right next to each other. So somebody pretty clearly hand-typed root along with our IP address on one of the virtual machines that we had running in a hypervisor on a university server. So we got hacked. The reasoning for this is kind of embarrassing. Kali Linux has a default password on the root account, and that password is Tor. And we put a VM on the public internet and didn't remove that default password. So as a result, our server started spinning out mail spam, and we got an angry Slack message from the grad students in the lab. On a lighter note, this is another moment that made me really happy. This is a message with Nick, who's not here today, but he is a freshman who's generally interested in web app security. And so he was like, hey, it'd be cool to teach a meeting, kind of because we talk about it, planning the next one. We encourage the new people to do it. Can I do it like a semester from now where I feel more comfortable? And about 6 hours later, he sent me this message where he had completely finished all the slides and all the challenges for the meeting. Not shown here is a whole bunch of back and forth of like, hey, yeah, so this is like what a cookie is, right? This is like how you intercept HTTP traffic. But I still think it's really cool that we had a freshman who I don't feel comfortable doing this. And then really quickly turned around to, okay, I did it. And then he taught the meeting for that week, and a lot of people took things away from it. So we have our original problem, which is that getting new people into security is a really challenging thing to do. And we have our original answer, which is that we need to get better at teaching meetings. And it turns out this is a really hard thing to do. We came up with these really cool ways to improve our meetings. We came up with a couple of important questions to sort of figure out, okay, how are we doing? What are we doing? Is it actually working? That leaves out one demographic though, and that's our talented students. So if we've got people who have experience doing a particular subset of security, and they want to work on projects that are directly interesting to them, they're going to be a little bit bored by the regular weekly meetings. And we wanted to make that okay. So we have our senior members kind of walk around and help people out, which is one thing that kind of grounds them and keeps them human. And at the same time, we'll meet separately in two separate other groups, which is our pen testing and our bug bounty group. So pen testing is like this very alluring phrase that draws a lot of people, and so one of our seniors was working for a consulting firm and said, oh, I know a little bit about this, let's do a separate group that explicitly does this. And so a bunch of people met every week of the first semester and tried to do pen testy offensive things. And then we did a separate bug bounty group. So this is one where we're saying, okay, we need to sit down for a long period of time and build out fuzzers. And we want to try and find bugs in operating systems and Chrome and other random browsers and try to submit them for bounties and actually make some fame and money. Both of these are pretty new, and they're not very far along either. To be fair, we've only been working on them for about a year, and we've been slowly trying to figure them out more and more. So we don't super have a good sense of where they'll be in terms of identity, and this is where we kind of need a hand. So we've got a whole bunch of different ways in which people from companies or people from other university clubs can contribute, and we'd really like to see these sorts of things happening. In particular, we can host people to come teach our meetings. So we can offer you a place to stay for a week. So if you want to drive down to Champaign and then teach a CypherCon meeting and get to meet a bunch of smart undergrads and learn things with and from them, then we totally invite you to. We'd love to see that happen. Thomas Kotacek coming down and teaching a meeting on deserialization and AES attacks was a really successful example of this that I was really happy with. Beyond that, we need money. The reason why we managed to send a bunch of people to this conference is that a large Silicon Valley startup gave us $5K. And this enabled a bunch of freshmen whose parents control their money, whose parents are still like, okay, what time are you leaving? Who are you driving with? Where are you moving from? Can still make their way to this conference because their parents don't have to pay for it. And they can kind of be like, Mom, I got this, right? It's all paid for, it's all taken care of, you don't need to worry about any of this. And then they can go to this conference and get to meet all of you cool people who are older and say like, oh yeah, security is actually the skill that I want to do. Beyond that, we can also use cash for things like hardware. We have a server, we can always use more disk for it. And we also want to run another CTF for recruiting purposes in the early spring. So we did one already with Northrop Grumman, where we had 2 Northrop Grumman engineers, and they come in, they bought us pizza, and they ran some really basic reversing challenges. And we also noticed a kind of a spike in attendance because of this. So we'd like to do this again, but in a slightly larger capacity at the beginning of the fall, approximately the first week of September. So we'd like to see about maybe like 10 or so engineers from different companies come in and sponsor prizes and sponsor pizza and run our basic meeting format and teach people who are freshmen in college who've never done security before, for the most part, a lot of really basic skills. And so this carries a benefit for us in that we get to recruit a lot of people because they're like, wow, this club has like a lot of clout and can get companies to come in, and these companies want to recruit us and get us internships and things. And so then that's really beneficial for companies because then they get to hire people out of that pool who are talented or look sharp, especially if they're early and they came out to a security club on their own. So we need money to make this event happen. If you're interested in contributing to that, please get in touch. Beyond that, we've gone over all these things. There's a sort of short summary of the important takeaways that we've got here. And the first one is that when you make CTF more fun and more friendly, people are far more inclined to do this. And this helps them learn, and this helps your organization grow, and it helps really just make CTF a better place for a lot more people. More people get into security, they get jobs, they get money, everyone's happy. Beyond that, we also noticed that flipping a classroom does a lot. So this is kind of the educational research term for learn by doing, and when we follow this format of having a lot more focus on the actual working on activities helps people learn and retain things and come back. And lastly, you want to minimize all of the work that you do. So if you are spending all this effort designing a weekly meeting, then you might as well make it reusable in the future, so that future underclassmen who will now be upperclassmen won't have to redesign the entire meeting, but they can take the existing one and make it better. Okay, so where does that leave us? Well, at the end of the day, we have to teach 200 freshmen to use the command line over the course of the semester. And that's kind of not exciting. But a club is really about a lot more than that. If you can make the environment friendly and fun and compassionate, then people will want to come back and work together. And if they want to work together, they'll learn the skills and all of the really awesome stuff will follow. And so that's kind of our mission statement for the club. We've developed it over the course of this past year, and I hope to see it carry on in the future. You know, it's nice to see people who are freshmen and sophomore teaching a meeting for the first time. It's nice to get together and like legitimately be really happy to be hanging out and learning about TLS at 1 in the morning on a Wednesday night. I think the club's made a lot of progress over the past year, and I'm really excited to see where it'll go in the future. That being said, I'm graduating, so I'm looking for a job approximately a year from now. If you want to see me working for your organization, please get in touch. Yeah. That's about it. Thanks for coming. What's up?
How do you deal with like flag sharing? Do you encourage people to work together and share flags? Okay.
So the challenges are relatively easy. It's going to be a lot less than what you typically see in a real CTF.
Yeah.
And the idea here is that people are new. We don't want to have bad competition. We want to focus on good competition, which is working together, and sharing flags is a problem because they're smaller clubs that people can share how to get. And so we see a lot of that happening. What's up?
So how do you reach out to people? Do you put flyers up? Do you have email lists? Is it done through classes?
It's we have one recruiting event that's part of the really big CS club at the beginning of the year. We just go up and say, hey, we hack things, come learn how to hack things, and that draws a lot of people for the first meeting. After that, the only people we get are kind of a slow trickle of students explicitly looking for security. And so that's maybe not the best because we only really have one big event. That's why we want to run an additional recruiting events with the support of more people. Go for it.
So you mentioned giving money. Is there a vehicle for doing that tax-free or something?
So yeah, I'm pretty sure we're tax deductible. So donations should be tax deductible, yeah. That's what you meant by tax free, right?
Yeah.
I'm 22, I still need to learn how to do my taxes.
It's the time of year, right? It's due Monday.
I mean, yeah.
What's up?
How do you, if you're doing the CTF all year round and you're aggregating those points and your attendance accounts for so many of those points, how do you get those new recruits interested in participating, say, in January, February, March, after there's already been a lot of meetings, they're super behind. I saw some of the jumps in there, but they would theoretically never be able to catch up to, you know, that senior guy that's been going to every meeting and just not doing anything.
Yeah, I don't really have a great answer to that. For the most part, so it depends on what motivates an individual person. The people who are going to start coming later in the year are going to keep coming really consistently. Like Thomas right here didn't come until maybe 2 or 3 months into the first semester, and he's in top 2 on the leaderboard already. So the other things that we have ways, like writing a meeting gives you a lot of points, and that's part of how Thomas made up having missed all of those meetings, was that he designed one, which not everyone does, and that bumps him up really high in the leaderboard.
Also, we escalate points a lot. So the starting meetings are 500 points. The meeting last week was 4,000. So.
Well, yeah, that was more that we didn't have a cohesive way of assigning points. It's not that important. The reason isn't the point value. Ultimately, the whole point is to motivate people into doing more. And so whatever serves that is the best thing that we can do. So people typically don't care necessarily about being at the top, and if they do, they'll find other ways to do it, like Thomas did. Yeah. Thanks for coming. I've got some of the these slides and other resources are up at sigpony.com. If you want to use them at any of our meetings or submit meetings to us, we'd really appreciate it because it'd be great to see people getting value out of the work that we've created.